2 Samuel chapter number 15. We're just marching through this study that we have titled God's People in Need of a Greater King. And we talked about at the beginning of 1 Samuel, Judges kind of leaves a cliffhanger after centuries of downward spiral and debauchery in Israel. We're left with the words, "In that day there was no king in the land, and the people did that which was right in their own eyes." And it kind of sets up the need for strong central leadership in God's people, in God's nation, that would keep their hearts on His law and have justice and righteousness and God's will in the nation. Well, we went throughout 1 Samuel and found that the people wanted a king, but not the king that God wanted. They wanted a king after their own heart. So God gave them Saul, and initially he was impressive, but we found that the people's choice for king was not good enough. They needed a better king, and that king was David. And we've been finding out here, unfortunately, in the last couple chapters, since chapter 11, that though David was a man after God's own heart, and though he was a great king, and God used him, God established a covenant with him, ultimately, David was not the king that God's people needed. Amen? And the king that they needed, the king that we all still wait for, is King Jesus, who will come and reign one day, and we look forward to that. Chapter 15, tonight, conspiracy in God's kingdom. Man, it's real. And we see things like this played out today. It's messy as relationships and conspiracies, and if we could even use the term narcissism, always is. Absalom is what we would define today as a narcissist, one that's just drunk on affirmation and ambition and looking out for himself and using people as tools for his own devices and vengeance and desires and things like that. It's causing problems in the family, but through all of it, God is there, and we're going to see that, and God is leading and guiding David. Here's the big idea before we jump in. Even when God allows evil individuals to initiate times of crisis, He will protect His chosen servants who revere Him and desire His will. We've got to be confident in that. Even when God allows, He doesn't cause people, evil individuals, to initiate times of crisis, but He will allow it. Just as He allowed Absalom to initiate a time of crisis in this passage, He will ultimately protect His chosen servants like David, who revere Him and desire His will. And that's the same with us. That's what we're going to learn in the big idea here tonight. And then we've got about 4 practical takeaways towards the end of the message as well. A longer passage this evening, so I want to try to get through it as quickly as possible, but stop along the way to make sure that we understand it. But let's set some context. Chapter 11, David sinned. He messed up in that big way, committed adultery, murdered Uriah the Hittite and other men that were along with him, that died in the conspiracy of his murder. And then the next chapter, God sent Nathan the prophet to deal with David's sin, to confront him on it. And he said, God's not going to require your life, but there will be consequences. And one of those consequences was the sword will not depart from David's house. And we start to see over the last few chapters, beginning in 13 and last chapter 14, this prophecy, these consequences of the sword not departing from David's house playing out in real time. Chapter 13, it was unsettling. It was nasty. The oldest son of David, Amnon, began to lust after his half-sister and eventually raped her, and that was Absalom's sister. David was angry, but he really didn't do anything about it, so that bitterness in Absalom stewed over a couple years, and eventually he plotted to murder Amnon because of what he did to his sister. And then he fled the country, spent 3 years in Jeshurun with his grandfather. And last week, we looked in chapter 14 where Joab, David's nephew, desired to help David in this and bring reconciliation. And so they brought a scheme to bring a lady before David and present a fake case where David would apply judgment and then she would turn it back around him and say, hey, listen, you should apply the same judgment to your situation with your son Absalom, who is the heir, and you've banished him to another country. And David told Joab, go get Absalom. And he brought him back, but David refused to meet with Absalom. For 2 years, Absalom wanted a meeting, and David refused to meet with him. And Absalom, like the crybaby manipulator he is, he wasn't getting his way, so he decided to burn down one of the fields, the farms of Joab, to get the attention. And he got that meeting with David, and they hugged, they made up, and now we think, hey, there's reconciliation. And then we come to chapter 15. And let's understand the narrative this evening. And it came to pass, verse 1, after that reconciliation, the king kissed Absalom. After this, that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now we think maybe there's some reconciliation here, but immediately the narrator jumps to Absalom preparing for himself a small army. Absalom now at this point begins to project an image of power and strength to the people of Israel. And it's worth noting here that Absalom is the first Israelite mentioned in the biblical text to have acquired for himself a chariot. Up to this point, chariots were associated mainly with the enemies of God, whether it was the chariot riders in Egypt, whether it was the chariot riders of the Syrians or others. And Samuel said in 1 Samuel 8 that eventually their king would bring to himself chariot riders and project this strength that many of the kings of the world projected, and Absalom was the first. And each of David's sons would acquire, after Absalom, would acquire for himself a chariot as well. We understand God's people didn't necessarily need those things to achieve victory because God was to be the one who fought for them and enabled their victories. But here Absalom is projecting a worldly persona of strength and regality, riding in his chariot with a small army of 50 men going before him everywhere he went. Kind of get that picture as Absalom went around Israel. He's in this chariot. Wow, what a guy, what a king, what a strong man. 50 men go before Absalom, and he's beautiful, as we saw in the last chapter. Unfortunately, Israel had already been guilty of desiring men who had an impressive image to lead them rather than letting God be their king. And this lays a foundation for what Absalom will continue to do. Back in verse number 2. Absalom rose up early, and he stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man that had a controversy came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, Of what city art thou? And he said, Thy servant is of one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto them, See, thy matters are good and right, but there's no man deputed of the king to hear thee. Absalom said, moreover, If I were made judge in the land, that I were made judge in the land, that every man which hath any suit or case might come unto me, and I would do him justice. Absalom is not only just projecting strength to the people, he's setting up, understand here, he's setting up for himself to become king. Now he's projecting a genuine interest and care for the people. He gets up before daybreak to go to the city gate to undermine the leadership of David. And when people would come to hear their matter before the king, to just like the woman in the previous text where, hey, I have this issue that I need you, king, to enact justice in the land about. I have this neighbor that's doing this and I need your verdict as a judge, O king. He would stop them. He'd undermine and interject and say, Hey, where are you from? Expressing a type of interest in them. Oh, you're from Benjamin? I just tucked that in the back of my mind to use this as I establish my network of spies for the coup later on. Oh, wow. You're going through that? Oh, I can't believe that happened to you. Man, this is a matter that the king should hear, but unfortunately, the king has no time for you. And the king has nobody else to hear this matter. Wow. Sunday, we were challenged by Timothy, who had a genuine care for the well-being of others more than himself, but this is not that. Absalom is faking it. He's feigning it. He's lying about the king and causing the people to think he's failing to carry out one of the most important duties of Israel's leader, which is to carry out justice in the nation. He said, there's nobody here to give you justice. The king's really not doing his job. He's using their problems to pretend he cares, painting David in a negative light so he can begin campaigning for himself as champion of the people. Well, if I was in charge, if I were made judge, I would bring justice to the land. If I was the leader, this wouldn't be happening. Absalom would bring justice to your situation. I'd fight for you. I'd take up your cause. You can imagine some of the conversations eventually. Well, Absalom, maybe you should be king. You're the heir, after all. You have a right to the throne. Oh, stop that. I wouldn't want to. Well, I mean, maybe. You can imagine what's happening here. Verse number 5. And it was so that when any man came nigh unto him to do obeisance, that is to show forth respect, and it was typical when you went before royalty at that time, just like the woman went before David, they would bow down and they'd do obeisance. They would show respect to the royalty in the land. And it was so when any man came nigh to him to do obeisance, he put forth his hand, and he took him and he kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom to all the Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Now he's projecting not just a fake care for the people, a fake desire for justice. He's projecting a false humility. They'd come and bow before him and say, "Oh, no, don't bow before me. No. Let me, I'm your equal. Let me kiss you. There's no reason to bow down before me." Stealing the hearts of the people. Understand that God made his father David king, not him. Amen? That was clear in the narrative. God chose David to be king. Absalom's job was to ensure the hearts of the people were behind God's chosen leader, not for the glory of David, but for the sake of unity among God's people, for God's glory and the good of the nation. But instead, he is stealing the hearts of the people unto himself for his own glory and his vain ambition. Verse number 7. And it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, "I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode at Jeshurun in Syria, saying, If the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. And the king said unto him, Go in peace. So he arose and he went to Hebron." Now he's projecting a false sense of spirituality, a piety towards God. "Oh, my father king, when I was in Jeshurun, I missed Jerusalem. I missed my kingdom. I missed being in God's promised land. And I made a vow to God, if he would let me go back to Jerusalem, I'd go to Hebron and I would worship him. King, let me go to Hebron so that I can be spiritual and worship God like I promised him." He had no desire to worship God down there. That's where he was going to stage his coup. David was anointed king in Hebron, and eventually Absalom would proclaim himself king in Hebron. Now, I want to note something here in verse number 7, and I don't want to dig deep into it because it's not helpful towards the main point tonight. But it says here, it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said. There's a lot of theories about what the 40 years is referring to. A lot of them challenging. Some of them make sense, some of them don't. We won't get into it tonight, but just don't misunderstand. The 40 years is not speaking of the time that Absalom was stealing the hearts of the people. That's not possible. Absalom probably wasn't even 40 years old by this point because David reigned for 40 years. David's reign is not over, and Absalom was born after David began reigning in Hebron. We don't know exactly what the narrator is referring to there for 40 years, but this conspiracy did not build for 40 years. Just don't misunderstand that. Like I said, we won't dig further than that, just something to note as we go on. Verse number 10, we'll keep going here. But Absalom sent spies throughout the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor from the city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. Understand here what he's saying. He's setting up people all throughout the land of Israel. He said there's going to come a time when we stage this coup. And when you get word, you hear the trumpets, you're going to proclaim in the streets that Absalom is reigning in Hebron. Not that he was anointed in Hebron, that he's reigning in Hebron. Today, when the news breaks, we can pull out our phones and we can Google, is this true? Back then, they didn't have that. And if everybody from city to city is all proclaiming at the same time that Absalom is reigning in Hebron, then the whole nation is going to believe that in some way, shape, or form, whether it was David's death, whether it was a coup, if they understood it as a coup or not, Absalom is now the king. And as king, he was given authority by the people. He's setting up all these spies. And notice in verse number 11, it says that there was 200 men from Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. There were a number of people that grew towards Absalom and were loyal to Absalom, but Absalom somehow connived to call 200 men, probably men in the government, men from the military, those that would have been key to help David refute or defend against this coup. He called them to Hebron. Whether it was to worship with him, we don't know. But they had no idea that when they went to Hebron, this was going to take place. But somehow he removed 200 men that could have helped prevent this coup from Jerusalem, brought them to Hebron with him. We understand here that Absalom is the villain. There's no doubt about that as we read this. And recognize, too, he's a capable man. The way that he is setting up this conspiracy and the charisma with the people and just setting up this chain of spies all around the land, he's a capable man. And imagine what he could have done for God if he put aside his bitterness and selfish ambition and used those capabilities for the glory of God. If he was a good and loyal and patient like his father David, he probably would have been a great king eventually in God's timing. But unlike his father, he didn't respect God's anointed. He didn't wait on God's timing. He didn't let God promote him. He manipulated God's people to depose God's chosen leader so he could be in charge. So how does David react to all this? The conspiracy is strong. And the narrator helps us recognize that this is a conspiracy. This is not the work of God. This is not the justice of God because David failed to enact justice with the situation of Tamar. This is a conspiracy of Absalom, an ambitious guy that served himself and his own passions and desires and need for vengeance. Verse number 13. And there came a messenger to David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom." And David said unto all his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, for we shall not escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword." And the king's servant said unto the king, "Behold, thy servants are ready to do whatsoever my lord the king shall appoint." Now it seems like the servants would have stayed to fight, even to their death, if that's what David ordered. But David's heart, David's concern, was the people in the city. David didn't want bloodshed in Israel. David used wisdom here. He knew that this being such a strong conspiracy and the 200 men out of Jerusalem, now with Absalom, in the hearts of the people towards Absalom, if he tried to stand his ground in this moment, then people in Israel would have died unnecessarily. And so he decides, we're going to retreat, guys. We're going to get out of here. But he's making sure that the city of God, the city of peace, Jerusalem, is taken care of, not a place of civil war in the nation. Verse number 16, and the king went forth, and all his household after him. The king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house, making sure that his house is in order. Verse 17, the king went forth, and all the people after him, and tarried in a place that was afar off. And all his servants passed on beside him, and all the Cherethites, and all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, 600 men, which came after him from Gath, passed on before the king. I want you to notice here, we'll circle back around to this, but God is providing a loyal contingent for David even in the midst of this crisis. God is providing for David safety and strength so that he can get out and spare his life and wisely wait for the time that God's going to restore him and give him the door back to the throne. Verse number 19, a small story about the loyalty that David was able to gain through being a loving, good, and meek king, not one that had ambition for himself, like Absalom. Verse 19, then said the king to Ittai, the Gittite, wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, meaning Absalom. He referred to Absalom even as the king. For thou art a stranger and also an exile, whereas thou camest but yesterday. Should I this day make thee go up and down with us? Seeing I go whither I may, return thou and take back thy brethren. Mercy and truth be with thee. Like, Ittai, man, you just came with me, and there's no way that I could make you pledge your loyalty to me and come with us. Go back and serve Absalom. It's going to be a better situation for you. It's going to be a better situation for your family and all those that came with you seeking refuge from your land. Mercy and truth go with you. Stay with Absalom. Don't come with me. Verse 21, and Ittai answered the king and said, as the Lord liveth, and as my lord the king liveth, surely in what place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also will thy servant be. And David said to Ittai, go and pass over. And Ittai the Gittite passed over, and all his men and all the little ones that were with him. He said, listen, I pledge my loyalty to you, and I'm going to invoke the name of Jehovah to show you that wherever you are, you're my king, not Absalom. And wherever you are, we're going to be. We're going to support you, David, in this coup. This is the goodness of God, giving David the loyal following who were devoted to help him stand through this crisis. Verse 23, and all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people passed over. The king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, and all the people passed over toward the way of the wilderness. They headed east, down the Mount of Olives, past the brook Kidron, and they were heading towards the Jordan River. Eventually, David would stop and make camp around Jericho, right past the mountains as they entered the valley near the Jordan River there. Verse 24, and Zadok the priest, and all the Levites were with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God, and they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had done passing out of the city. And the king said to Zadok, carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again and show me both it and his habitation. But if he thus say, I have no delight in thee, behold, here I am, let him do to me as seemeth good to him. Now, notice the good and godly character of David here. David shows both reverence and surrender to the Lord's will in this passage, in these verses. When Israel years ago used the Ark of the Covenant as a token to gain them power in battle, David refused to have any part in that. Now, he could have very simply said, the priests are on my side, and if the priests are on my side, and I have the ark, and I have God's presence with me, then you people better come to me instead of Absalom, because I'm God's anointed. But he would not use the ark of God, the covenant, as a token for himself. He said to take it back to Jerusalem. Take it back to the tabernacle. Let it rest in its place. You go back with it. God's in control of this. If he wants to show favor on us, he will show favor on us. But if he wants to judge me, and if this be his will, that Absalom have the kingdom right now, then let that be as well. We're not going to do it like this. Guys, take the ark back. Verse 27. The king said also unto Zadok the priest, art not thou a seer? Return into the city in peace. The idea of seer in 1 and 2 Samuel would be the idea of a prophet. So Zadok, like Samuel, fulfilled the duties of both a priest and a prophet. He said, aren't you a seer, a prophet? Return into the city in peace, and your two sons with you, Ahimaaz, thy son, and Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. See, I will tarry in the plain of the wilderness until there come word from you to certify me. Zadok, therefore, and Abiathar carried the ark of God again to Jerusalem, and they tarried there. Not only was David showing respect to send the ark of God back, now he wisely and providentially, by God, has two men on the inside that can relay to him information. He's got a network of spies of his own. Verse number 30, and David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet and wept as he went up and had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went. Those are signs of lament, the covering of the head and the bare feet, signs of grief. And notice this, we'll come back to it. But David is grieving. David's taking this crisis seriously. This is not a light thing that he's having to leave Jerusalem because his son, who killed one of his other sons, has staged a coup against him. It's not a light thing to David. It's not a light thing to the rest of the people. They're grieving as they're fleeing for their lives from Jerusalem, trying their very best to do what is good and right and pleasing to God and make sure that lives are not taken in this process. But it didn't stop David. Verse 31, and one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Ahithophel was one of David's most loyal and trusted counselors. And recognize this, Ahithophel was the grandfather of Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, I'm sure, looking into the past, the wound in his heart of what David did to his granddaughter and grandson-in-law may have played a little bit of a role in the motivation to join Absalom's side. And David, he hears about that and he cries out to God, Lord, turn his counsel, his wisdom into foolishness before Absalom, because he knows Ahithophel is a wise individual who would be a benefit to Absalom. Verse 32, and it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount where he worshiped God, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. That's the idea of mourning, the torn clothes and the ash or the earth on the head. Verse 35 or 33, unto whom David said, If thou passest on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. But if thou return to the city and say unto Absalom, I will be thy servant, O king, as I have been thy father's servant hitherto, so will I now also be thy servant. Then mayest thou for me defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. Here's another loyal counselor of David, Hushai. And it's as if God providentially immediately answers David's prayer. Lord, turn the wisdom, the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And here comes Hushai. And David says, listen, if you stay with me, it's just going to be a burden. Why don't you go back? You're loyal to me, and would you do this for me? Go back and stand before Absalom, and everything Ahithophel says, you turn it to foolishness, and you speak the opposite into Absalom, and make it to where he's not going to be able to retain power and keep this conspiracy up. Verse number 35, and as thou hast not there, and hast thou not there with thee Zadok and Abiathar the priests? Therefore it shall be that what things soever thou shalt hear out of the king's house, thou shalt tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, they have there with them their two sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, and by them ye shall send unto me everything that ye can hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. Recognize the narrowness of David's escape. All this is playing out in real time in a matter of hours. And they're not that far away from Jerusalem right now, going up to the Mount of Olives. And as Hushai comes back from meeting with David and walks into Jerusalem, Absalom is marching in with his chariots, his 50 men, probably at this time a whole lot more than 50 men, into Jerusalem. God's providence is all over this, assisting David with this escape, protecting him. And that leads us back to the big picture and the big idea. Even when God allows evil individuals to initiate times of crisis, He will protect His chosen servants who revere Him and desire His will. Now, we've seen David's heart in sending the ark back and his concern for the holy city and for the people. Absalom pretended to care about the people, but he used them. David truly did care about the people, even to the point that he said, listen, take the ark. If I have to dwell in the wilderness for a little bit, we'll trust the Lord, and He'll deal with it. Whatever His will is, will come to pass. We can be sure of that. And God providentially helped David through this. David desired what God desired in the situation, and ultimately God protected him through it. He delivered him. It could have been much worse. There could have been great bloodshed. But David's mind to love God and surrender to His will protected him. And we'll face times of crisis in our life that are brought about through the work of evil individuals. And people will stab you in the back. People will lie about you. It may be in the workplace. And there was a time that I remember growing up, an individual came into one of the body shops where my dad worked, and to make a long story short, he got in with the boss and eventually got my dad fired for no reason, no good reason, I should say. And sometimes those times of crisis come into our life because God will allow evil individuals to bring those times of crisis, but through it God will protect. And if we have that heart to surrender to God, to do His will, not fight in it, not seek our own vengeance, but let God have the vengeance, God will protect His chosen people. The righteous, the Bible says in Proverbs, the wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. We don't have to fear, we don't have to worry in those times of crisis. He will avenge the righteous. That is a conviction, remember, that David had from the beginning, even as he ran from Saul, being the anointed of God, anointed by Samuel before he faced the giant. And he's running from Saul for his life. And he trusted God to deal with the narcissistic Saul that threatened his sanity, threatened his life, and opposed God's will. He wouldn't stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed. That has always been the character of David. Yeah, he's had his ups and downs, and he wasn't perfect, but this was one thing that was consistent with David that we see is something we ought to follow and replicate in our life. Even when God allows evil individuals to initiate times of crisis, He will protect His chosen servants who revere Him and desire His will. Just keep on worshiping, keep on surrendering. Number two, in the narrative of Samuel, the big picture, God's people continue to struggle with surrendering to God's will for their leader. David was God's clearly defined and chosen leader. Even when David was anointed, like we just mentioned, he refused to depose Saul, who was much worse. I mean, he was running after him, trying to kill David, and he refused to depose Saul. He let God handle it. And here the people were discontent with David, who God made king over them. They allow a show of strength and earthly power manipulate them away from the simple faith in God's plan. And that was the problem way back before they called for a king. They didn't want God as their king. They wanted a king like the other nations that had a show of strength that they could send out into battle for them because they didn't trust God in His plan. Ultimately, they will do the same when God sends the Messiah King, Jesus. They'll reject Him. They thought that the Messiah was going to lead a revolt over Rome, but He said, I didn't come for that. I came to save your soul, and you have a need for salvation. And eventually they killed Him. They rejected Him and killed Him. That's an issue that Israel had for so long. And folks, we've got to make sure that we don't have that same issue. That we make sure that we trust God and what He's doing in His sovereignty rather than trying to push for an earthly show of strength to bring about something that God has only the power to bring about. How can we consider Jesus? Here's one. In the idea of David's surrender, Luke 22, 41 through 42, and when he was withdrawn, this was in the garden, we know from them about a stone's cast, he kneeled down and he prayed, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. I'm sure David didn't want to go through this crisis, but he gave those words there. He said that whatever the Lord's will is, if He decides to give favor upon us, that's great. If not, then let God be God in this situation. Some takeaways tonight. We've got 4 of them. Number 1, keep your ambition in check. from the negative example of the villain Absalom. Keep your ambition in check through constant surrender to God's will. Now, there's many things and issues that could have contributed to Absalom's desire for this coup. It could have been the fact that David was not a present father. He couldn't have been when he had 9, 10 wives and a bunch of concubines. I mean, David sowed some mess in his own family. That could have contributed some of the problems in Absalom's heart. Obviously, no doubt, David's lack of what Absalom felt he should have done when his sister and David's daughter was raped by David's son contributed to this. But at the end of the day, God was in charge, and God had not removed David yet. God had established a covenant with David. And at the end of the day, Absalom, through all of this, refused to surrender to the plan of God and the covenant that he established with David, and refused to wait for God's timing in this. And in our life, man, it's good and it's right to have goals, to desire great things for God, but we've always got to make sure that we're surrendered to God's will and God's plan, not driven by our own ambition or a need for revenge or whatever the case might be. Number 2, don't let yourself be a pawn in the sinful ambition of others. We've got to have a little bit of discernment. Part of the reason that Absalom was able to do what he did, and part of the reason that there still are Absaloms today able to do this, is because they feed and manipulate our selfish hearts. They tap into it. Oh, where are you from? Oh, wow, you're from the caves of En-Gedi, beautiful place. My dad used to camp back there when he was younger, running from Saul, but yeah. Oh, wow, I can't believe you're going through that. Man, I want to help you, but I don't have the authority. If I was made authority, and tapping into this selfishness of the people and their concerns for their needs and their desire to have the showy king, to say, he's our hero, and Absalom, he's our guy. And this happens all the time. He deceived many as he acted duplicitously to undermine the role of David, king, and his leadership, acting as if he cared for the people, expressed a desire to be appointed as one who would do things differently to meet their needs, to solve their problems. He had no real concern for the people. He had only bitterness towards David and selfish ambition. Now, this happens in society today, and whether it's in families, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in churches, whether it's in the political sphere, whether it's in our communities. People get talking, hey, if I was in charge, things would be different. If I was the leader, then I would make sure that I took care of you, that your desires and your wants were met. It's the work of the devil, and we should have no part in it. That's not to say that we go through life always reading into people's actions and always thinking everyone is up to something and everything's always a conspiracy. We can't fall in that ditch either, but let's truly discern when someone genuinely cares or is just appealing to our selfish need for affirmation in order to manipulate us to their side so that they can feed their own ambitions. You've got to discern those things in life. Number 3, in times of crisis, we must trust God with our fate. And that's what David did. And he trusted God. Let God be God. He is sovereign. He is powerful. He will bring His plans to pass. Trust yourself into the hand of a holy, perfect, sovereign God, as David did. Let's look at verse number 25 and 26 again. And the king said unto Zadok, carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, He'll bring me again and show me both it and His habitation. But if He say thus, I have no delight in thee, behold, here I am. Let him do to me as seemeth good unto him. In those times of crisis, always get on your knees and surrender. God, whatever your will is, I'll take it with grace and I'll accept it. But number 4, and finally, on the flip side of that, surrendering to the Lord's will does not mean that we remain apathetic. Understand David here, even in his grief, even in his surrender to the Lord, he was decisive and wise in his actions. And his wisdom is to be commended here. Boy, like we said, it could have been much worse. He prevented a great amount of bloodshed while ensuring Jerusalem, the city of God, was safe and the ark was where it needed to be. He made sure his house was cared for. A system of spies was set up so that he could wisely take his next step when the time was right. He didn't just run away with his towel between his legs and just give up, saying, well, just let go and let God. As we trust our fate to God and surrender to Him, we've got to make sure that we don't fall into the ditch on the other side, which is apathy and escapism. Just refusing to deal with the hard things and using, and it's possible, hear me on this, to piously use the sovereignty of God as an excuse to not act. And we must be careful that we don't mask our refusal to deal with hard things as faith that God will just work it all out and I'm just going to run away here. That's not God's desire. We've got to strike that balance in times of crisis. We got to do what is wise and what is right and not let our grief bring us to the place of depression where we would just lay on the couch and say, well, if this is God's will, then I'll just accept it and I'll just lay around and die a horrible death. No. Act. Do what you can do. Trust God and surrender to whatever He will do in His time. Got to strike that balance. Even when God allows evil people to initiate times of crisis, He will protect and deliver those, His chosen servants, who revere Him and desire His will. So let's be those that revere Him and desire His will. And in times of crisis, we don't have to fret. We don't have to fear. We can trust God will deliver. God will keep us safe. He'll help us in those times.